One of the first ways that many people are introduced to spirituality is, in teenage years through Ouija boards or seeing seances or even watching popular mediums on television. And although this serves as an entrance to spirituality for many, it also is a source of great confusion and distortions. Because without an understanding of the astral and some very basic spiritual principles, you're basically opening yourself up to distortions, confusions, programming, control, all sorts of infiltration of the auric body. So one of the first things that really needs to be understood about the astral world, the etheric world, the spiritual world, the non-physical world, is that just like the physical world, actually, it is a spectrum. So when we look at the light spectrum, as scientists understand it, they have a very small range that they call visible light. And then, below that, we have infrared, or above that we have infrared, and below that we have ultraviolet. So the longer waves are ultraviolet, and the smaller, higher frequency waves are infrared. Now we know many animals can see in these ranges, and we also know that humans have the ability to detect these ranges somewhat, Now, spiritual people and those that study consciousness and esotericism at all, spiritual science, will understand that we have an ability to actually see these ranges, not just feel them, but actually see them. Once we learn how to, again, once we tune back into the dimension that they represent. See, because the third dimension is exactly that bandwidth of visible light. Everything else is being filtered out by the ego. But the soul can see all these wavelengths, and in fact, wavelengths that humans are not even aware of from third density at this time. So maybe you've begun to figure it out, that the ultraviolet light frequencies correspond with the lower densities, second density, second dimension. And as we get up into the infrareds, we start dealing with the fourth dimension and the fifth dimension. And as I said, we move into light, which is currently undetectable and unknown to scientists, which was always postulated, in the past. They called it the aether or the ether, And all the ether really is energies currently undetectable by human scientists. That's it. And in fact, they never even fully got rid of it. They just renamed it dark matter and dark energy. So it's still energy we can't see, It's just the modern translation of ether. Because that's all there is. Other than that, there is no such thing as dark energy the way they postulate it to be. What they're having trouble with is trying to understand the universe while only looking at a tiny spectrum of it, a tiny slice of it. Like trying to understand light with only visible light. That's their problem, and in fact, everything is light, and that is in fact what's happening here, translated into our physical experience. We're the ones that adding the physicality to the experience through our minds and egos, but in fact, all that is here is light. Okay, but let's bring it back to the original conversation, which was the frequencies that make up the astral, okay? So in the same way as other light, it is graduated, okay? And as I've told you, there are many levels and realms within the astral, and all realms work like this, going up into the non-physical. So, and I've spoken about the lower astral being vastly different from the upper astral. Well, what people should understand is that for the average third density soul, when they cross over at death, because of how encumbered they are and how entangled they are with trauma and illusion and dishonesty and suffering, then they cannot go very high in the astral. You know, they are bound to the levels where their addictions and their traumas are played out. They're attracted to those of similar vibration within the astral until those things work themselves out and they start to rise, they start to ascend. Now, sometimes this can happen very quickly as one realizes that they have died and starts to let go of the encumbering things from life. However, sometimes this is not the case, and often many souls, depending, especially in the lower vibration, like if they died anywhere using the Hawkins scale of vibration, just to translate it, you know, if they died in the vibrations of fear, lust, desire, greed, you know, anger, they're likely not going to rise very far, you know, and also they might not realize they've died. There's a good chance that they will be in denial to this for some point, you know, for some time. And there are kingdoms of deniers within the astral, you know, where life is mimicked, you know, over and over and over, and they try to keep up this illusion, and there's whole games being played out there, you know, which aren't always pleasant. So another spiritual principle that we really should learn early on in our spiritual journey, because it's very important, is that basically you can only communicate with one level up or down of your vibrational frequency, of your average vibrational frequency. Now, if you raise your vibration up, though, significantly for some time, you'll be able to communicate with higher levels. And that's the point of meditation, prayer, psychedelic drugs, shamanic rituals, really everything, you know. That's the point of mysticism. When we look at someone who is communicating with recently departed souls from the third density, who are talking about, you know, their taxes, or their sister-in-law did this, or they're angry about this, or, you know, the fact that they are communicating and tuned in to the lowest, not the lowest, they're not communicating with hell, but they are communicating with the third density copy of Earth. They're communicating with those who are basically walking around as if they haven't died, which is a heavy denial, you know, and a heavy, it represents that you are heavily bound in materiality, because anyone actually knowing their freedom and the bliss and amazing array of experiences available to a soul in Devachan or any of the higher astral realms would not hang around down there, you know, where it's like living in the slums when you're a billionaire. You're just not going to do it. The fact that this person is communicating with this frequency does not actually represent that they are an advanced spiritual student or even psychically gifted. You know, they may have some mental gifts from a past life, or maybe they've just practiced some mental practices, you know, and become adept at them enough that they can communicate the technique, you understand, but without the spiritual work being done in all other aspects of one's life, you're not going to be able to artificially raise your vibration past your own blindnesses, past your own prejudices, past your own dishonesties, without a rigorous spiritual journey. So therefore, we have a double blind hit right here. We have someone who is not doing the necessary spiritual work, especially if they've made a business out of this communication. And to be honest, this is what most people are going to ask for. So you're going to be generally more successful as a channel or medium if you can communicate with, you know, specific recently passed relatives and stuff, than if you're communicating with angels and stuff. I mean, there may be some money in the angelic communications, but may not. You know, it may not be about that at all. So the other hit is that these souls who have recently passed, just because they are dead does not mean that they're wise. It doesn't mean they've learned a thing. It doesn't mean they've changed at all. In fact, many of them are in such denial at this point, and they've gone through such a trauma, and their whole ego isn't still there. They've already, some of it has been discarded with the death process, understand? So they are already at a diminished capacity. So you are basically talking to someone almost as if they're asleep or in a fugue state, you know? And if they're any kind of normal if they're not normal, excuse me, if they're a more balanced ego of third density, then that process won't last too long. And let's just say, for example, it lasts a month, of shedding and the realization of where one is and what's going on, and letting go and releasing these things. Well, as they're doing this over this course of the month, they are literally changing their density. They are rising into higher and higher stratas in the astral, So they will quickly start to move out of communication with the medium. However, much of that energy, that ego, that personality that was there will stay there for some time, like a memory. The energy, because not all of it can translate up. Only the more refined core essence of the spiritual being can translate up into the higher dimensions. Much of the accumulated karma and energy and stuff that is not in alignment with the higher realms will be discarded, like a memory or a bad dream. So this thing can be communicated with, this shell, this ego. So you're communicating with a shell or a fragment or a personality fragment, while the true essence, the true ego, the higher ego of the being is moving on to communicate with its soul. Okay? Well, the communication process with the medium, with this intelligence, because this thing has a limited intelligence, understand? So the communication process with this from the medium gives it energy, vitalizes it, and keeps it alive longer. Well, the longer this thing is alive, the longer this thing is communicated with and given energy, and if it's given too much energy, it may become self-aware to the point where it starts to feed off energy. If it starts to associate with the medium in conversations and starts to realize it can live this way, it may not ever let go, or it may take 100 years. It may become something completely different. So just a communication with an untrained medium, communicating with a recently departed, troubled personality fragment, can create a negative being, a negative astral being. And that karma, whatever karma that negative being perpetrates, will be tied to the medium. And in some way tied to the ascending soul, probably. Tied to the soul who has moved on and probably reincarnated. So there will be some karmic tie or responsibility or debt there too, or entanglement. So this isn't good for anyone. It's not. The only communications that should be done with recently departed souls or personality fragments, let me say egos, is well wishes, is to wish them a safe journey and love, and to reassure them that everything on earth is forgiven and that everything is taken care of and that they don't need to worry about this anymore. Like the Tibetan processes and Egyptian processes, these are advanced, knowledge left over from the Atlantean times. So this is what we need to return back to. It's vitally important. Even just the grief that one feels when someone's passed on, right? But this deep, horrible grief, which I don't want to invalidate anyone's pain, because it can be incredibly painful, of course. But this comes from a belief that perhaps death is a permanent separation, or that we'll never see them again, or we're truly separated from them. And see, that grief can pull them back and really hold them up in their journey. So if we truly love someone, what we want to do is tell them, we'll see you again soon, we love you. Just go on your journey and do whatever you need to do so that we can meet back whenever, at the earliest possible time, for us to be reunited in love. So again, the mediums that are communicating with these personality fragments, these recently departed souls, or possibly just so I'm not saying every medium is communicating with just a personality shell. I'm saying sometimes they are, because if they've really recently departed, within the past couple of weeks, there's probably still enough of the integration of the essence and the higher ego and the soul to say you're communicating with the actual being. But at some point that will cease, and you're communicating with an echo, and you do not want to feed energy to that echo. Basically, those are the two people. There's basically three possible beings that can communicate with recently departed souls on a consistent basis. Okay. So those are those who are slightly psychically aware, but tuned into the material world's frequency and can't get much beyond that. Okay. So they really have no business messing around until maybe they have a talent, maybe they have a true talent, but they need to do the necessary work to purify their vehicle before they begin to use that talent, or else they're not using it responsibly and they will incur negative karma. The other possibility is a true master. A true master can locate a soul at any point, at any level, at any frequency, and communicate there with directed will and intent safely. Okay. But most people are not going to find those, and no true master is going to be on television doing it for money, or even publicly, honestly. And the other possibility we have is a black magician, or a magician, or a fraud. Could be any of those, really. So those are three other possibilities. But it could be fraudulent. There's a huge amount of that, huge amount of fraud, huge amount of just magician craft, stage magic. And that's probably the majority of it. There's a good amount of just some psychic attunement with magic. So there's fraud with some psychic attunement that they're not even fully sure is happening. And then we have the true black magician who is doing it to actually create these entities, empower these entities, and manipulate others through the knowledge and information that they can garner. So they know, or they should know, that they're not dealing with a true being sometimes when they're engaging with these things. But to them, it's more like a mind steal. What they're seeing is a reflection of the person's mind and personality, so they can get a lot of information out of the person in that way. And maybe they're not so concerned with the accuracy of it all anyways. They just need enough to show their power in the situation. And finally, the last thing I want to say before I go is, remember, no matter what type of psychic we're talking about, no matter what type of channel or medium or magician or whatever it is that we're talking about, I do want everyone to remember that we all have these abilities. Now, every one of us has talents and strengths, and maybe you're having a really hard time channeling, but maybe it's not probably to represent that you can't channel. It's probably to represent that you haven't found what you're actually supposed to be doing, though. You may have a whole other talent in a whole other area, like healing or divination or spiritual art or transmission or even spiritual science. So there's so many things that you could do or communicate with, or maybe channeling a different type of communication or method or being or realm or strata. Or maybe, likely, you may have a talent, but you have not done the spiritual work. So your higher self, unless you're really persistent and taking the service to self path, but if you're walking the path of light and your higher self recognizes that you are not ready to consistently, communicate with the conducive levels, with the positive levels of higher, dimensions, or if you don't have the wisdom to truly understand the information or the difference of negative entities and attacks pretending to be light entities, they will block this off from you for your own protection. So it may be that you need to just do more spiritual work, purify. It's not time yet. I've had to recognize this in myself countless times where I've thought I was more advanced than I was, because in meditations and with psychedelic use and with angelic contact and extraterrestrial contact and all sorts of things, I've had experiences far beyond my normal average vibration. It's fairly normal for me to change vibrations quite dramatically, and sometimes I'm at a place where the power that I'm at, that's at my fingertips, is just ungodly. It's indescribable. And then to come back, it feels like, well, I don't have any limitations, I can do anything, but it's not actually the case, because I still have lots of work to do here, So